This is Curious Minnesota, a Star Tribune project that sends staff from the state's largest newsroom hunting for the answers to great questions we receive from you, our readers. We're here to answer everything you want to know about the state's people, places, and culture.
Welcome to Curious Minnesota. I'm your host, Eric Roper. Today's episode of Curious Minnesota is sponsored by Primrose Schools and the Minnesota Historical Society. Como Park in St. Paul is home to two very special Twin Cities landmarks. One is the Marjorie McNeely Conservatory, a striking glass building where visitors can walk amongst lush vegetation even in the dead of winter. The other is Como Zoo, the state's oldest zoo, which opened in 1897. Both of these sites are owned and operated by the city of St. Paul. Now, we might imagine that St. Paul city leaders got together way back then and decided to open a zoo. But the zoo actually opened almost by accident. Reader Max Murphy wanted to know more about the earliest days of Como Zoo, so he submitted a question to Curious Minnesota. Here's Max.
The internet said that the Como Zoo got started with a gift of deer that was given to the mayor of St. Paul. And I'm just wondering why the mayor of St. Paul was given a gift of deer in the first place. There's plenty of deer in Minnesota, and I couldn't find any explanation as to how that came about.
Thanks to Max for that question. I'm talking today with Erica Pearson, who wrote a story on this topic for Curious Minnesota. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Erica.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I thought this was such an interesting story. You know, those of us in the Twin Cities today, we know that St. Paul owns and operates a zoo, and it's kind of a tale about how cities kind of take on new responsibilities, sometimes kind of by accident. It wasn't exactly an intentional process that this became the oldest zoo in the state.
Yes, in the state. Yes, just came together with a gift of these three deer, and soon there was a zoo.
So Como Zoo, if people haven't been there, generally sort of take us there. I mean, there's a famous conservatory, which is, if you haven't been to the Sunken Gardens there, is very much worth seeing. They're in Como Park, right?
Yeah. So there's Como Park, and then there's the Marjorie McNeely Conservatory, which has the beautiful glass dome that you can see. And then just behind that is the zoo. When you go, you have this idea that the zoo was planned to be part of the park all along, but instead it came together totally by happenstance.
Right. And for a long time, this was sort of like the main zoo of the Twin Cities until the Minnesota Zoo opened in the 70s, right? And
Yeah,
we'll talk
for
about
decades.
That later.
Yeah. There was another one in Minneapolis for a time, but yes, for decades it was like the zoo.
Okay. So we start our chronology in the 1890s with these deer getting donated to the city. Like, what's that about?
It's sort of mysterious to me why animal gifts were so common, but it turns out that they were very popular. And so a livestock dealer and a prominent citizen named Charles Haas, as well as the Minneapolis Park Board, gifted these deer, and then a paddock was built for them and a keeper brought in to take care of them. And then I was able to find Charles Haas's name in an article by Margaret Manship, whose father was one of the early zookeepers at Como. And she wrote a delightful article about growing up as the daughter of a zookeeper. And then also she has a wonderful list of all of the animals as they came in. And it's sort of humorous to read because first came the deer, and then the railroad baron, James J. Hill, donated an animal called the zebu, that's a kind of a cow. And then a lieutenant governor gave 2 bison, then a monkey, red foxes, a parrot, 4 elk, and a black bear named Peggy.
Okay. And the lieutenant governor only gave the bison. The rest came from all sorts of people.
Yeah, but she does have some of the gifts were anonymous, but a lot of them, there's records of all of these folks.
Politicians included among the donors here. We have State Senator Charles Hausler giving an alligator.
Yeah.
I don't know do we know when that was about? Or
That I think was one of the later ones, I think maybe in the 20s.
So this was like a popular concept at the time to give someone an animal?
Apparently.
Okay.
Apparently,
yeah. Seems like, you're kind of gifting them a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so the city of St. Paul is sort of establishing this zoo as it's getting these gifts from people. Now, Minneapolis, by just after the turn of the century, also had a zoo, a private zoo, but then this becomes part of the Como story. So what was that all about?
Yes, it's actually a really colorful story. There was a zoo by Minnehaha Falls. It was called Longfellow Zoological Gardens, and it was run by an entrepreneur named Robert Fish Jones, who was a former fish market dealer. And he opened it in 1907 near his house, which actually was a replica of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That zoo ran for a long time, but then when Jones died, it closed. And in 1935, 200 of the animals came to Como Zoo. So It got a big boost in numbers at that time.
So you mentioned in the story that Jones's animals were provided for by his son as far as the food and things like that, right?
Yes. But Manship wrote in her article that her dad, his name was William McMahon, who was the zookeeper, that he
At Como.
At Como, yes. Yeah. That for the other animals, he had to go out and ask for food and for funds for food. And she wrote, here's a quote, "He begged feed for his animals from wholesalers, commission men, packing plants, and feed companies using their surplus or outdated merchandise."
Okay. So these animals are outside and this zoo is starting to evolve. But what are they doing with these things in the winter? Because there's not really buildings, right? Yet?
Right. No, not yet. So they brought them into the conservatory in the winter.
Okay, interesting. But you also write in the story that some of them would get brought to the zookeeper's house?
Yes. In the article, Margaret describes animals coming home and that her mom would be sort of an animal doctor to them. That there would be lion cubs in the garage, and she would put turn the oven on warm and turn it off so then they could sort of have a little cozy spot, that there would be baby owls, and even a sick monkey came home in their house.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
And so now we're kind of getting into the 30s, which is when this gets a bit more robust, right, as far as like the infrastructure around the zoo?
Yeah, that's when the first building was built, and that was funded by the Federal Works Project Administration, and that is still standing. It's now administrative offices, but there were cages inside and then these cages on the outside that you can still see. And then at that time, they also built, it sort of looks like stacked rocks to create a cave-like area for the bears. They called them the bear grottos. Mm-hmm. And then the big attraction was Monkey Island, which was modeled after an exhibit at the Chicago World's Fair. And what it was like a tall stack of rocks and then a moat around it, water moat around it. So then the monkeys were just up on there. And I found a photo where there's like a little flag at the top of the hill that says Monkey Island.
Oh, interesting.
Very fun.
Yeah. And you wrote about there's also like escaping monkeys once in a while?
Yes, the monkeys did not necessarily always stay on their island. And Margaret described a few scenes of escapes where like a monkey would go and play with clothes on the clothesline and mess with in neighbors' backyards.
Okay. We'll be right back.
At Primrose, our balanced learning approach means exploring academic skills and life skills, combining purposeful play with nurturing guidance from teachers, and setting children up for success in future classrooms. Learn more at primroseschools.com/Twin Cities.
History doesn't only exist in the pages of a book. History exists all around us. You just have to dare to look. Listen to Minnesota Unraveled, a podcast from the Minnesota Historical Society. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
So this zoo kept growing. Again, this is like before the Minnesota Zoo, so this is kind of our primary urban core zoo. So tell us a bit more about the growth, because they keep adding new features and attractions.
Yeah, there was a tortoise named Toby that kids could ride on. And also during that time, they would go out. They had sort of like a mobile zoo that would go out and visit classrooms. and also sick kids in the hospital. I looked through our photo archives from the Minneapolis Star and the Tribune, and there's lots of amazing photos of like kids in their hospital bed cuddling lion cubs and whatnot. Yes.
And this is when they got a sea lion too?
Yeah, the Sparky Show, which still is a popular feature at Como. But yes, it debuted in the 50s and is still running today. And eventually they moved the monkeys into a different area and the seals took over Monkey Island. And
Okay. And so you mentioned the story about a polar bear, but there's like a bit of a story behind the some fencing. Anyway, tell me the tale.
Yeah. So this is surprising, but there was not a perimeter fence around the zoo until the 70s. So if you were walking through Como Park, you could just walk through the zoo. It was free, even apparently in the middle of the night. And this is what happened in 1972. A visitor fell into the polar bear enclosure after midnight, and St. Paul police were called and had to shoot and kill the polar bear in order to save the man. The Minneapolis Star ran an article the next day, and the man's friend said, "I sobered up real quick after I saw the bear on top of David." Definitely a close encounter, and soon after that, the zoo got an outside perimeter fence. So
and did you mention
can't just wander in?
There was some controversy about the shooting, or did you read?
Well, readers were pretty upset that the bear was killed, yes. Yeah.
So 1978 is sort of when the new dynamic of the Twin Cities zoo scene changes with the Minnesota Zoo. So tell us a little bit about, because that's in Apple Valley, so that's kind of a bit far from the core.
Yeah, and it also is a much bigger area.
I'll admit I have not been to the Minnesota Zoo.
Yeah,
I should go. I've been to Como.
You should. Yeah, they're very different spaces, and already by that time, Como was working to change from having smaller cages to creating bigger habitats. And, zoos in general have changed so much through the years. But yes, that was a big change. And there actually were two different times in history where the zoo almost closed, but then Friends of the Zoo fundraised and got it back on track. And
you're talking about Como Zoo?
Yeah. Because the Minnesota Zoo has always sold a ticket to enter. So it's just a different situation.
If you were to describe the difference, I mean, one is much bigger, obviously.
Yes, just in terms of land and number of animals, and designed with the intention of being a zoo as opposed to finding a home inside a popular park in the middle of the city.
Would I have fun there without any kids or anything?
You know what? They have concert series at the Minnesota Zoo, so you can go go after on, Yeah. My husband is a big fan of the bird show, so check out the bird show. People love the Sparky show at Como too, though.
Mm-hmm. So have you been to Como lately?
Yes, I went with my kids just to walk around and see some of the older buildings when I was writing this article to try to get it in my head. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that the day we were there, a sloth gave birth to a baby. So there was a new arrival. Yeah. The zookeepers were all excited.
And were your kids excited to see the zoo? Or?
Yeah, we had fun. It was rainy, so we were kind of running from area to area. But it was fun, and they had tons of questions for all the zookeepers and different volunteers who were working, so it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth mentioning that they've made lots of changes. Definitely if you go and you see the 1937 building and the small cages in front, it makes you realize that zoos today are much different places as they work to make it a better experience for the animals that live there, not just for folks to come and see them up close.
So like bigger enclosures, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The animals have different areas where they can go.
Okay. I love reading the comments on Curious Stories because people always leave these very interesting anecdotes. A lot of people in our audience, lived as children going to these places and have memories. And this comment was left by Eddie55431. and Eddie wrote, when I was a child growing up in St. Paul, one of my parents' friends was a docent and benefactor of the Como Zoo. As a result, we were recruited to take care for a baby lion of theirs for a weekend when all the other caregivers were out of town. We were the only kids on the block with a lion cub sleeping on a pile of blankets in our bathtub because Mom never did like cats. So I just thought that was such a fun story.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love getting those comments from folks.
Yeah. Well, Erica, thanks so much. A fascinating story.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, that's it for today's show. Thanks, as always, to Matt Gilmer for editing this podcast. Got feedback for us or a question you'd like us to tackle? Send us a note at curious@startribune.com. And if you're enjoying this show, please tell a friend about it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Curious Minnesota. We want to hear from you. Ask questions and read more stories online at startribune.com/curious. Our show is recorded at the Star Tribune's headquarters in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, and our music is produced by Matt Gilmer. If you like the show, please rate us on iTunes or leave a review. And until next time, stay curious.